Let's begin with Iran. It's the 12th day of unrest and calm remains elusive. As Iran's economy continues to struggle, pressure is mounting on the government to act. Now, Kurdish opposition groups are calling for fresh protests in the country's Kurdish regions. The call for demonstrations came from exiled parties based in Iraq, urging people to shut businesses in a strike in solidarity with protests spreading across Iran. According to the Kurdish Kamala Party, the strike is meant to show unified support for the protesters. The group accuses Iranian authorities of using force and carrying out what it described as brutal attacks on demonstrators. Raza Pahlavi, the exiled son of Iran's former Shah, has also weighed in on the protests. He urged Iran's security forces to stand with the people.
در روزهایی که مردم شجاع و متحد ایران در حال ساختن و نوشتن تاریخ هستند، پرسش من از شما این است که در کدام سوی تاریخ خواهید ایستاد؟ در کنار جنایتکاران یا در کنار مردم؟ در این لحظه های سرنوشت ساز از شما انتظار دارم که به آغوش ملت بازگردید و سلاح خود را نه برای شلیک به مردم که برای حفاظت از آنها به کار گیرید.
As pressure grows, Iranian officials have accused the United States of interference. Iran's foreign ministry condemned comments by US leaders, saying Washington is exploiting the protests, and blamed US sanctions for worsening Iran's economic crisis.
Those who today come into the streets to take part in riots, or lead them, or support them, or assist them, in light of this explicit declaration of position by the criminal Zionist regime, and likewise by the criminal president of the United States, in the issues they raised, that if anyone comes into the streets for riots or to create insecurity or supports them, then no excuse remains for them.
Meanwhile, some protesters were appealing directly to Donald Trump for support. President Trump has warned Iran that it would face serious consequences if more protesters are killed. US lawmakers have also publicly expressed support for demonstrators who are demanding a better life amid a cost of living crisis. As tensions escalated, a police officer was killed near Tehran today. The officer was reportedly stabbed while trying to control unrest. Authorities say an investigation is underway. At least 38 people have been killed so far, including members of the security forces. The protests have spread rapidly, reaching 111 cities and towns across all 31 provinces. The demonstrations began on December 28th when shopkeepers in Tehran went on strike. They were protesting rising prices, economic stagnation, and the collapse of Iran's currency. But what started as an economic protest has since turned into a broader movement demanding political change. Well, this is now Iran's biggest protest movement since the 2022-23 unrest triggered by Mahsa Amini's death in custody. And while smaller than earlier uprisings, demonstrations pose a fresh challenge for Iran's leadership. Well, for more on this now, we're joined live from Sweden. We have Ruzbe Parsi, a senior adjunct lecturer at Lund University. Welcome to the program. Let me ask you first then, how do you assess the strength or otherwise of these current protests in Iran?
Well, I think the interesting thing this time around, because as you mentioned in your report, this isn't the first time that we have these kind of protests. The interesting novelty, if you will, is not necessarily the strength of the demonstrators, because while it is widespread, it is not near the numbers of 2022 or previous uprisings. The interesting thing is the lack of decisiveness from the side of the state. That is that the government and the state seems more unsure on how to go about solving this, or at least calming the tensions. But more importantly, it doesn't seem to have much of a strategy for how to get themselves out of this impasse. That is the larger impasse of a foreign policy crisis with the confrontation with Israel, and domestically with an economy that is basically slowly but steadily imploding.
Now, Iran accuses outside forces of fanning the flames here. Do they have a point?
They do, in the sense that obviously the baseline of the Iranian economy is partly to be accounted for through the American sanctions that have been ongoing now since Trump was president the first time, and also previous to the nuclear agreement. So that has stymied the economy quite a lot. But of course, there is the lack of governance and corruption, which are much more important factors, which are wholly to be put blame on at the feet of the Iranian state itself. Then there is the fact that the Israelis have publicly supported the protests, including the Israeli intelligence service Mossad, and that we know from the war last year that the Israelis are present on the ground in Iran. So you cannot exclude that there are some influence from that side, but that in and of itself cannot explain the size nor the depth of these protests.
Right, you mentioned the economy there. I mean, can the Iranian leadership maintain control at a time of such deep economic crisis?
Well, this is the problem. In a sense, there are a number of decisive watershed moments here where they should have made a decision, any kind of decision basically, to go in a particular direction. Instead, they've been counting on being able to muddle through every time. They need to come to some kind of agreement with the Americans in order to be able to unleash the Iranian economy. They need to look themselves in the mirror and deal with the systemic corruption that they themselves have engendered. These are very basic decisions that they have postponed again and again. And at some point, this iteration of protests coming more and more frequently will have a very severe effect on their ability to have authority in society and actually govern.
Rouzbeh Parsi, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. The world doesn't fit in boxes, so why should your news? From battlefields to negotiation tables, from internet outrage to real-world injustice. The conversations everyone is having and the ones they're avoiding. It's the same show, but this new year, Firstpost America gets a new look. I'm Kerry Johnston, and this is Firstpost America.